Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and good afternoon, respected viewers of the Voice of the Cape's YouTube page as well as the Voice of the Cape's Facebook page. It gives me great honor and privilege once again to introduce our facilitator for today, and it is none other than Sister Alia Qara, and she will be giving over and facilitating today's session of the VOC's Matric Revision Program in collaboration with Futures Academy SA Online High School. And Sister Alia Carter will be giving over the discourse and facilitating today's session, which is going to be dedicated to all of the matriculants out there, particularly the geography students in Matric. And this will be on Geography Paper 2, inshallah. Once again, as a reminder, please share and forward this link to all of the matriculants out there who are doing geography and who are preparing for the examinations. Please use this as a means of preparing for your geography upcoming examinations, and of course each and every day on the VOC's YouTube and Facebook pages respectively we have various subjects where we're basically giving over the discourse to all of you our matriculant students in order to prepare for your matric exams. So without further ado, we hand over to our facilitator for today, none other than Sister Alia Carter, who will be taking you through the geography paper 2 work. Bismillah.
Shukran so much, Brother Amir. Assalamu alaikum, and how is everyone? I'm so sorry. To those of you that are writing geography tomorrow, paper 2, good luck. Hopefully this will help you. It is what we call a cram session. I'm not going to go through everything in finer detail, but I will place emphasis on that is extremely important. So to start off with, we need to understand two very important words or concepts when we talk about settlement geography, and that is site and situation. So the word site is the exact piece of land that is occupied by a certain settlement. With regards to that, why is it placed there? It's because probably there is water, minerals are available, there is a natural harbor, for instance, in that place, or there is a forest in that region that would supply building material, or there are minerals in that particular place as well. Then we get different types of settlements. With regards to site, something called a wet settlement, a dry settlement, and a defense settlement. Wet would obviously be the settlement is placed near a water source. Dry settlement would be a settlement is placed in an area where it is above the flood line, which helps prevent flooding to that region. And defense, well, this used to be once upon a time, but we don't necessarily look at it anymore. It is a place where it is a little higher up in terms of safety, so that the settlement can look over a higher area to see if an oncoming enemy is approaching them. In terms of situation is the position of a settlement in relation to its wider surroundings. So when we talk about site and situation, we talk about site is the actual place. Situation is why is that settlement in that position. What is around that settlement that makes it place itself there? Most often we look at, again, above flood lines. We look above, again, at warmer northern facing slopes or southern facing slopes, depending on which hemisphere we are in. If we are in the southern hemisphere, most likely we are on the northern facing slope. Also, remember, it is either the thermal belt if it's within a valley region, and it is often near a transport system or a network in terms of accessibility. Right, so when we talk about the two different types of settlements, we are talking about a rural settlement and an urban settlement. A rural settlement is a single functional settlement, meaning that it mainly involves itself in primary activities, whereas an urban settlement is a multifunctional settlement that often includes tertiary as well as secondary activities that take place. Then we get different types of patterns. My slides are just jumping. In terms of a rural settlement, we get something called a dispersed settlement. That means settlements are placed far apart from each other. And then we get something called a nucleated settlement. Now, often the question loves to ask this particular aspect of rural settlements in terms of nucleated and dispersed. So they ask things about why would it be placed so far apart? Why is it so close together? You need to be able, first of all, to identify if it is a dispersed settlement or it is a nucleated settlement. You then have to provide reasons for that particular. Why do you say it's so far? Why do you say it's so near? You then have to give advantages or disadvantages with regards to a nucleated settlement or a dispersed settlement. Remember, a nucleated would be where you have a foreman that actually manages the land. You don't have to do lots of traveling in terms of everything being around you because you are sharing different assets, etc., etc. It's a social aspect would be included in that, but the main problem would be then there is no room for growth within a nucleated settlement. Whereas a dispersed, things are far apart from each other, traveling becomes a problem. The manager manages the farm himself, so it's quite costly, things like that. So remember again, as I said in the previous session, if you need to answer a question like this, place yourself into the position, become the farmer, become the farmer that is isolated, become the farmer that is within a nucleated settlement. It makes things much easier. Then we get the differences in settlement sizes. And what only thing that you need to remember here is that it works in a hierarchy. So we start off at a farmstead, then we move to a hamlet, a village, a town, a city, a metropolis, a conurbation, and then eventually a megalopolis. So it has starting at a point where there's a single dwelling to a complete mega city where it houses over millions of people at one go. Right? So that would be your differences. Then, in terms of the settlement shapes, we get three different types of shapes. Now, often the settlement shapes come in with nucleated and dispersed settlements. So they work hand in hand with each other. Remember, a round settlement is often where there is activity that takes place with around a central point. So maybe a kraal that is placed in the center of this particular settlement, and people build around it in order to protect their kraal. Crossroads is where multinational roads or main roads meet each other, and the settlement actually develops around that particular area. Linear would be along an actual road. So it would be along maybe a road, maybe a river, maybe a forest, etc., etc. But linear in a sense where you can actually see plots of land being next to each other, parallel to each other, as we would say. Next major question that is often asked in settlement geography with regards to rural settlements is the idea of rural urban migration. Remember, rural urban migration means the movement of people from a rural area to an urban area, depending on certain factors, which are called pull factors and which are called push factors. Now, this you've probably learned from grade 6 upwards, so you should know what pull factors and push factors are by now, but pull factors means What attracts you to the city life? Push factors means what forces you away from a rural area. So let's look at quickly at pull factors. Pull factors would be better jobs, salaries, education, medical facilities, as well as the bright lights or social aspect. In terms of force, mechanization. So your farm now no longer requires a high amount of people working on the actual farm. Why? Because everything is done by machines. Or you get much lower salaries, or droughts often affect your farm. Crime, people steal equipment from your farm, or they continuously steal your produce, etc. And last one is unemployment. Because of mechanization, unemployment becomes ripe, and henceforth you don't have a job. You are now forced to move towards the urban cities. Now, in terms of what happens, we get something called consequences to the rural area, which is called rural depopulation. And this is a part that often comes in with regards to your 8 mark question or your paragraph question, sometimes your 6 mark question where you need to know 3 points or you need to know 4 points. So, consequences is empty farmhouses, crime becomes a big problem, unemployment, fewer investment opportunities in terms of old people, more old people as opposed to young people. Why? Because the young would now move to the city areas and they leave behind the old people. So, very little young people to actually now harvest the land, look after the farms, look after the area. There isn't probably no young people in terms of school going children, so schools don't have enough students to attend it, etc., etc. What eventually lands up is that shops start to close down, businesses lose money, and it lands up being a complete ghost town. So the next thing would then come in. How can we fix that particular situation? So, strategies that can be used to avoid your rural urban migration or rural depopulation. So, remember that's another most important aspect in terms of your rural settlement issues. Go through it. Guaranteed it could be a question that could come out in your paper. Then we look at rural settlement issues, which is your second one part of it, in terms of land reform. So the first settlement issue was your rural urban migration. The second one is land reform. So if you get a question on your rural urban migration, you won't get the land reform. But if you get land reform, you don't often get the rural urban migration. So, in terms of land reform, when we talk about land reform, we're talking about injustices that were addressed where people were forcibly removed from their land. So, now, once they've been removed, they want to gain back their land again. Now, how exactly do they gain back their land again? Is by the government enforcing land reform. The first one being land restitution, where the land is given back to its original owners. Land redistribution, meaning the government makes land available to previously disadvantaged people. And then the last part of it is land tender reform. That means to secure the rights of those living on the land owned by others. So, one of the major challenges of this particular land reform is that you need to have a willing buyer and seller. Number one, it is an extremely expensive process to go through either restitution, redistribution, or land tender reform. It's a very long process, so it takes years and years and years for it to actually come right, which often ends up making farming in terms of subsistence farming still very, very, very ripe. So people still subsistence farm and they don't move towards the commercial farming. There's no economic growth. There's often claim disputes. So say, for example, you want the land that you are living on and you believe that it belongs to you, but there's somebody else that owns it. So you put in the claim, and the claim takes years and years and years to actually go back into court and eventually then become yours. Costs you lots and lots of money eventually. Another big problem is that there's no knowledge of farming. So if land is given back to its original owners, most often the original owners of that particular land were not farmers. Now that it's given back to them, what do they do with the land? How exactly do they go about? What do they plant? What seeds do they use? What type of irrigation do they use? What type of fertilizers do they use? What type of pesticides? They don't have the knowledge to actually farm. So eventually, the land on which they farm becomes non-arable and eventually leads to soil erosion, or it leads to it not becoming at all viable, leading to desertification. Also, new owners are not well trained. So the question could ask you, what are the challenges? And then the second part of the question could be, what strategies could we use to avoid this? Again, look for the common trends. Look for the first thing that you would do is education, skill development. You could do things of that sort to help grow the new owner, etc., etc. Right? So bear in mind, you would either get one or the other. Now we move on to urban settlements. And in terms of urban settlements, we get three different types of settlements. We get something called central places, which is a central area that supplies goods and services to all rural surrounding areas. Number two is trade and transport towns, meaning they are specialized towns dealing only with certain trade or transport. Give me a second. Sorry about that. So, when we talk about trade or we talk about transport, we talk about something called a break of bulk. Break of bulk means, let's take a container ship, for example. It is bulky. It has massive containers on this particular cargo ship. When it docks into the harbor, specialized equipment is used to take off that particular container and it is placed on a truck. It then moves, or truck or rail, and then it moves to its final destination. We're breaking the bulk, break of bulk. That's the first one. Junction basically means it's an intersection of two main transport routes. So it could be rail to road, or it could be maybe linking it to an airport or something of that sort. So where two major, or maybe even two major highways actually meet, a junction. So where they meet, that becomes a junction town. A gap town is a town that is found within the falls of two mountains or the valley of two mountains. It generally requires a single road because of the physical features that are barricading it within itself. Specialized towns would then be mining, education, industrial, resort, or commuter. Those are kind of easy to understand. They are specialized to that particular function. So, for example, Valcom is specialized to a mining town. Stellenbosch was originally specialized to education. It's now moved on. It has much more sectors within it, but let's not just touch on that. So you must be able to identify the types of urban settlements on perhaps a diagram or a map, and you need to be able to give reasons for your particular answer. You also need to know what is a lower order goods and higher order goods. So I forgot to mention that. Lower order goods is something that you would need on a daily basis, every single day: bread, milk, doctor, etc., etc. Whereas higher order goods is something that you don't require on a daily basis. So you don't need it, maybe a pair of Nike Techies or maybe a handbag, things like that, where you don't, or maybe a specialized doctor, physician, or maybe a cardiologist. You don't require it on a daily basis. So the threshold, that means um, the customer range in which that particular goods or service that is required is much larger. Okay, so when I talk about threshold, let's just bring you back down. You get three different concepts with regards to an urban settlement that is extremely, extremely important to know. The first one being the sphere of influence. This means the total area in which a business draws its clients from. So, sphere of influence, how big the area needs to be in order for you to obtain your customers. Threshold is how much, or the minimum amount of people that is actually required for that particular business to function. So it could be 10 or it could be 20. So if it's a low goods order service, it doesn't need more than 50 in order to function. But if it's a high goods, it requires 100 and over for us to actually get some sort of profit from it. Then the range. This is the maximum distance a person would travel for a singular item. Meaning, if you want the Nike, let's go for Nike. If you want that Nike Techie, how far will you travel from where you stay to the city or to a central place to actually get that Nike Techie if it's not found within your area, right? So the distance we're talking about. Then we talk about things like urban growth, urbanization, urban expansion, urban sprawl, level of urbanization, rate of urbanization, and counter urbanization. So let's quickly just talk about this very, very quickly. When we talk about urban growth, the actual number that is living within a city, how much does it grow? Right? So the actual number. Urbanization means in terms of the increase in the proportion of people living within that area. So the growth rate, is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? How much? Then urban expansion in terms of the area. This is per square kilometer. Urban sprawl, this is the rapid unplanned growth of a city. The level, here we would use actual percentages. So we would say within a year, 10% has grown or 20% has grown. Rate would be at what speed does it actually move? So there's a lot that you actually need to know in terms of just the definitions. And remember, when we talk about settlement, we often speak about the definitions being the most important. You understand the definitions, you understand the section. So place more emphasis on the definitions as opposed to what actually is the content. The reason why a lot of settlement geography comes in a form of contextualization, that means a comprehension almost, where you're going to get an extract, and from the extract, you're going to pull out information. But often the information that you pull out comes from a term or terminologies which you need to understand. If you get that, you can answer the question quite easily. Land use zones, I'm not going to touch into it too much, but just remember the ones that we need to focus on very, very heavily is the CBD, which is your central business district, your transition zone, or your zone of decay, as we call it, is one of the most common questions that is asked in your paper. Another one that is also very common is your rural urban fringe. What exactly happens here? Remember, this is an area that transitions between your urban area and your rural area. So most often you're going to find golf courses within this particular area, or you're going to find an airport within this region. Why? Because the land is so big. Also, we find that when now we get the decentralization of businesses, that means they're trying to move away from your urban CBD. They move often to your rural urban fringe where land is cheaper, there's more space, etc., etc. So that's another important area that we look at. So remember, transition zone, CBD, and rural urban fringe is your concentrated areas that you're going to look at if you are going to get a question based on your land use zones. Street patterns, this often comes in most commonly in your mapwork section, where you need to be able to recognize the different types of patterns. Remember, a grid pattern is a very old pattern, meaning that when they start to develop a city, they start on a grid pattern, and from there they move on. So most often the question would be is, which part of the city do you think is older? Immediately look for the grid iron. Your radial is very circular. We don't really get radial patterns in South Africa. The irregular pattern is the most common one that we actually find. Remember, there's no clear structure with regards to this. It can be either planned or unplanned. And what happens is that it allows for very easy traffic flow. So there's no one-way stops. It moves parallel to each other where you get traffic flow on both sides. And it accommodates the topography of the region. So that means that if there's hills, mountains, lakes, etc., within the region, it accommodates, it moves around it, or it intertwines in it. It doesn't obstruct it at all. Let's move further. This is one of the most common questions that is often asked, and this is your urban profile. Remember, with your urban profile, first of all, it is a cross profile of a city, which shows the side view of a city from the center, which is your CBD, moving outwards, where you get your transition zone, your suburban office parks, you get your high income residential, industrial zone, and then eventually your rural urban fringe. You need to be able to recognize that. One of the common questions is, remember, buildings in terms of your CBD is extremely high, it is extremely dense, and it is extremely expensive. As you move away from your CBD, your buildings become less taller or less denser and less expensive, right? So remember that the more you move away from the actual CBD, the better it actually becomes. So there's no pollution within that particular regions. It's not concentrated in terms of density. It has less value, so it's easy acquirable, etc., etc. So I'm gonna just go quickly through a typical example of a question that is based on it. It says, on the urban profile shown on this particular page, which is here, the line graph shows you how land value changes as you move away from the CBD or towards the CBD. First question, how does the building density change? You would say, obviously, it increases as you come towards the center, or it decreases as you move away from the center, just depending on what the question is actually asking you. Why would you say so? That would be immediately the next question. You would say that land is expensive within the CBD. You would say that lots of buildings are close together and they are on very small pieces of land. Then the next question would say to you, why would an office park move away from the central business district? Very easy. Land value is cheaper. There is less traffic congestion. It is closer to your clientele. There is less noise. There is much more parking available. So very easily answerable in terms of what type of questions you can actually get. Then urban issues, another question that could be asked. Here they would centralize the idea on either traffic congestion, urban decay or centralization? So you're going to get this question. Just depends which part of the question you actually get. Are you going to get traffic congestion, urban decay, or centralization? If it's congestion, it's obviously to do with your motor vehicles within the CBD. If it's urban decay, remember I said to you it refers to the transition zone. So that's what you're going to look at. And centralization means that it is moving away from the CBD to your rural urban fringe. Why? So remember, in your urban issues, again, you need to know causes, effects, and solutions. What are the causes? What are the effects? What are the solutions? 15 marks for an urban issue question. Simple. It's not difficult. Just remember, effects is important. Most often it would be a 4-mark question or a 6-mark question. And then how will you counter that particular problem? Solutions would be then to the effects that you mentioned. This is your 8-mark question or your 6-mark question. Just depends on the type of question that you are getting at that particular moment. The last but not least, another urban issue settlement is your informal settlements. So if you don't get tested on those ones, you would then get tested on your informal settlements. Remember, why exactly are they there? First of all, what is the definition of an informal settlement? Then you need to be able to identify it. You will then need to be able to state the issues. So remember, where is it? It is on the edge of cities. Most often, it can be up to 30 kilometers away from your CBD. What are the problems that are associated with it? Remember, infrastructure is a problem, sanitation is a problem, amenities is a problem. They are very, very accustomed to probably having a fire within that region, and it has a very high population density, so diseases spread really, really quickly in this area. And then strategies to control and manage your informal settlements become also a very, very big question. Urban issue injustices. This is something that we need to know, but most often we don't really place much emphasis on your urban issue injustices. We rather focus on the others because we can get a lot more questions from them. So know that there's something called a social injustice, an economic injustice, and an environmental injustice. So when we talk about social, remember, not all people have access to equal things in terms of facilities and resources. Economic, there are different levels of income being produced in a society. And environmental, obviously, misuse of the environment, example, pollution. Okay, we're moving on to economic geography of South Africa. In terms of economic geography of South Africa, the first thing that we need to be able to understand is your different sectors. Primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. Primary, anything with raw material. Secondary, the processing and manufacturing of that raw material. Tertiary, any service that is offered to a consumer. When we say service, we're talking about lawyers, doctors, teachers, engineers, services offered by the government itself in terms of public health, or in terms of maybe electricity, garbage disposal. All of that is a service. So that falls under your tertiary activities. Then quaternary is anything to do with research and information building. So information technology, GIS, all fall part of the quaternary activities. Two big words that you need to also know: gross domestic product and gross national product. Gross domestic product is the total number of goods and services that is produced by a country in a single year. Gross national is the same thing, but it includes citizens that not only live in the country, but citizens that belong to the country. That means they stay somewhere else. Then they talk about a big word, GDP per capita. So what that means is we take the GDP of the country and then we divide it by the total population of the country and we get an amount. And that amount is per person. So per capita means per person. That's essentially what it means. So you need to be able to distinguish between those particular sectors and those two major words, right? When we look at agriculture, we need to know what contributes to the agriculture of South Africa in terms of its economic value. So, how much of it does it actually pay or contribute towards the economy? Remember, it contributes a very small section. Then we need to know what factors favor farming, what factors hinder farming, what are the main agricultural products, and what is the role of a small scale farmer and a large scale farmer. If we know this particular little block, we are 100% okay with agriculture. Remember, we either go factors that favor farming or hinder, or we talk about food security. So remember, food security is when you as an individual have enough food to sustain yourself in terms of a healthy lifestyle. Food insecurity would be when you do not have access to enough food to sustain a healthy lifestyle. So, when we talk about food security, we need to look at factors that hinder it mostly and what measures can be taken in order to counter effect food security. Brother Imad, I just need you to go to the next presentation. So I just need to touch on the main agricultural region there, please. Brother Imad. I don't know what happened to Brother Amir. Sorry, Marv. Amir. Okay, I don't know what happened to Amir, but let's continue. So, oh, sorry.
Salam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
I got it. I got it. It popped up. Thanks.
Inshallah.
So, in terms of your agriculture for this year, you only need to concentrate on maize farming. So, when we talk about maize farming, we are talking about corn in South Africa. And where exactly is it obviously grown, and what are the factors of what hinders it and what factors favor it? Remember, it is remotely grown in the upper parts of South Africa, more concentrated within the Limpopo province, in your Northwest province, parts of Mpumalanga, and then parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Orange Free State, mainly, but most commonly on the high veld areas of South Africa. Please remember that. So, when we talk about the regions, the Free State is generally 45% of it. Mpumalanga is about 21% of it, and the Northwest is about 18 plus minus percent of the total area that farms maize. So, why is it extremely important? Remember, maize is a staple of South Africa. That means it is the staple food of South Africa. If you have access to this particular staple food, remember, you are then food secured. So it earns very big money in terms of its foreign exchange. It also encourages development of industries to further enhance products. So, for example, from maize, we get then things that further develop. So, fertilizers. So, we get something called a multiplier effect, which is really important. Also, remember, we get byproducts of corn or maize, and that would be your matabella, it would be your what is that, your pap, etc., etc. So remember, staple meal of South Africa. What exactly are the factors that favor it? What are the factors that hinder it? Those are the important things. And what are the challenges? So Bear in mind, when it comes to your paper, you will definitely either get tested in terms of agriculture, or you will then get tested in terms of mining. Mining for this particular year, for this particular instance, is on your platinum mining. So platinum mining, remember again where exactly found. It is found in the upper parts again of South Africa. So both your maize as well as platinum are found in very similar regions, but not the Free State. So if you look at the map, you will see that most of it is centralized within the Limpopo region. And as we're coming down, it is within the Mpumalanga region. And then we move into the Northwest region. So those are areas where we find platinum. Remember, platinum is one of the biggest stimulations of your economy of South Africa, and it contributes majorly to your Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Remember, your platinum funds infrastructure of South Africa. It creates jobs. It is a major earner in terms of foreign exchange, and lots of important investment is actually placed within the country because of your platinum. What is its significance? That's what you need to know. Factors that hinder and then factors that favor. Brother Imad, I need you to go back to the previous one, please. Brother Mir, sorry, I don't know why I keep on calling you Imad. My boss's name is Imad. Sorry. The secondary sector. So when we look at the secondary sector, the question that most often comes in is the question of the type of industries. You need to be able to know what is your different types of industries. So you need to know what is a light industry, what is a heavy industry, what is a raw material orientated industry, a market orientated industry, footloose, ubiquitous, as well as your bridge industry. This comes in a form of either the 7-mark question or the 8-mark question, where it's either match columns or it's either filling the missing words. Or it could be in an MCQ form as well. But definitely, types of industries get very often tested, where they like asking this question because they realize that children just don't understand what it belongs to. So look at the characteristics of that particular question. Make sure you understand what it fits into, and the different types of examples that fit into it as well. So this is an extremely important table that you need to know. In terms of what exactly it contributes in terms of the secondary sector, you need to know the importance of it. But here we talk about the industrial development of regions. And when we talk about the industrial development regions, we have to talk about the 4 major industrial development regions. Brother Amir, you need to go back again for me to the other presentation. I'm so sorry for troubling you. Okay, so in particular for this year, we only need to know 2 industrial regions of South Africa, but you need to know where the other 2 are placed. So let's go through them. PWV means Pretoria, Witwatersrand, Vereeniging region, which is Gauteng. The second one being Durban Pinetown, which we call eThekwini. The third one, Port Elizabeth Uitenhage region. And the last one is your Southwestern Cape. So this year, you need to focus on PWV and the Port Elizabeth Uitenhage region. What factors favor it? What factors hinder it? Remember, we have lots of different types of industries that are available in the PWV area in terms of chemical, iron, steel, motor vehicle, factories, machinery, etc., etc. So what are the factors that favor it? What are the factors that restrict it? Port Elizabeth Uitenhage region. Also, factors that favor, factors that hinder. You then also need to know the economic and social impacts. So, economic impacts would be how does it contribute to the economy of South Africa? Social impacts would be obviously more employment would be available. That means that you would be then able to afford a house, you would be then able to afford certain luxuries, etc., etc. All of that come under social. Remember, when the word says economic, it means GDP of the country. Social means you as a human being. How does it affect you? Environmental, anything to do with the environment. Also, bear in mind that your Port Elizabeth Uitenhage region will automatically then move to your industrial development zones as well as your SDI, which means your Special Development Initiative. So this particular industrial region is connected to Guga, which is your industrial development zone. So what exactly happened is from your major industries areas or your industrial regions, we developed something called an industrial development zone. What happened was they saw areas of South Africa that was viable to change over to an industrial zone to make it more profitable to the economy of South Africa. So they identified certain areas that they could use. For this year, you need to only look at Kucha, which is in your Port Elizabeth Eastern Cape region. You need to know what are its aims of this particular area. You need to know what factors favor it, what factors hinder it. Again, your economic benefits, what the port of Niquera means actually, and the actual Kucha region itself. So it is not a difficult question in order to answer. The reason being this is that, again, it will be in a contextual type of a question where you are given information and you need to extract that type of information. Remember, you need to identify the zone. You need to state where exactly the zone, what it consists of. So most often airport. You need to state what are the developments within that region. You need to know why was it developed and its advantages as well as disadvantages, and most often your economic and social benefits. And last but not least, your Wild Coast SDI. So your SDI is your Special Development Initiative. Now, you looking only at the Wild Coast. So the whole region that is found along the coast, coming all the way from your East London region, moving all the way up to your Durban region. So your Wild Coast was mainly developed in terms of your agriculture as well as tourism sectors. Same story here. Factors that hinder, factors that favor, economic and social benefits. Why was it actually founded? And you must be able to define what an SDI is. So remember, it is a Special Development Initiative. It is a corridor that was actually developed within that region. That's about it that I can actually push forward to. There's one more thing that I need to just tell you. Economic sector. In terms of economic sectors, we look at the informal sector, which forms part of your informal settlement region. So economic or informal sector would be where these particular businesses are developed, like tuck shops or your car guards or small little tiny little vendors that are found on the sides of the roads, but they do not pay tax. So again, you need to know factors that favor it, factors that hinder it. Why? How can you avoid this? Strategies that can help benefit the informal sector. And what exactly is the implications of this particular sector? Remember, this is the easiest part of your actual paper. Settlement and economic geography is a lot of, I would say, pull out answers. Look at the the actual text that is given to you in terms of your infographic or your comprehensive or transactional, whatever it is. Pull out information from there. So you're extracting a lot of your answers in this particular paper. So you can score extremely high in this particular paper. Amir, that is it for me. I am officially done.
MashaAllah, we say shukran, jazakallah khair. And by Dramakasi, thank you very much to Sister Alia Kara for so beautifully giving over today's session. And that was, of course, pertaining to geography. I hope that each and every one of you, our viewers, have benefited from this. And once again, as we thank you for tuning in and we thank Sister Alia for giving over today's session, just a reminder once again, please forward and share this on the YouTube as well as the Facebook pages of Voice of the Cape. The link, please send it through to all of the matriculants who are preparing for the geography examination, inshallah. Once again, may Allah Ta'ala bless you and reward you all. We wish each and every one of the matriculants very well for the examination period, and we hope that this means preparation from the VOC as well as in collaboration with Futures Academy, preparing these sessions to help and assist you with your exam preparation will be the best means of you attaining success for your upcoming examinations. Once again, we say shukran and thank you very much to everyone. Until tomorrow, inshallah, when we continue with the matric revision sessions, we say to you, Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Amir, shukran so much.